Hey US1, how you guys doing? Quick joke. Hey, why don't cats like online shopping? They just simply prefer a catalog. All right. So for today, we're going to finish the unit on immigration in the West. So this will be the end of the notes. Um, on Tuesday, next week, that's when you should expect getting that short essay. Um, kind of summing all this up, looking at the experience of immigration that immigrants had through this period of immigration, as well as how we treated the Native Americans. So that's kind of the hint of what you should be looking at as you look at these notes. So you have that. Um, Also, take a note that I have assigned a project. Um, and so there are several pieces to it. They're all due in 2 weeks. So a little bit more than 2 weeks, like 2 weeks and a day. Several pieces. Each piece is worth a different amount of points. So check that out. But they're all due at the same time. Okay. So don't wait till the end to do all these things. And basically, what you guys are going to do is you're going to create like primary sources, about this experience. You guys are going to make history, right? And the idea that, what we're going through right now is something that people are going to study years from now. So what you're going to do is record your experiences with it, and that's what this project has. So there's several different pieces to it. They're all explained. There's separate videos for that. So you have that. So combined, I think that's worth about 80 points, which is a good balance, at least a little bit of a balance to your outlines, which were worth 100 points. Now, regarding your outlines, if you didn't like the grade you got, um, and I'm in the process still of grading some of them, but I think I'm pretty close. So hopefully they'll all be done by the time you see this. If you don't like the grade you got, you can, of course, make corrections, fix that, resubmit. You won't get all the points back, but you certainly get some of them. And where I deducted points, I made comments. So I told you what the issue was. So it should be hopefully easy for you to fix. You can pop into the Zoom and talk to me about that. We'll have one later today. Or you can, just shoot me an email and I can answer any questions for you that way. Okay. And then the last thing is that it is Memorial Day weekend. So enjoy the long weekend, but remember why we are celebrating Memorial Day, right? So Memorial Day is in honor of all those that have fallen, that have sacrificed their lives so that we can enjoy the freedoms we have. So here we are, doing our own form of sacrifice for these past 9 weeks in terms of quarantine. That's nothing compared to what some others were asked to give. So take note of that and honor that on Monday in some way. Just be cognizant of it. That's why, we have the day. Okay. So stay safe, stay smart, enjoy the break, and I'll talk to you guys later. So today we will finish our conversation on immigration at the turn of the century, focusing in on basically the reaction of nativists, people who are already here to this large influx of immigrants. So when we left off, we were talking about this wave of new immigrants coming in. Of that wave of new immigrants, it was the Italians who were the ones who were kind of singled out um, by groups that were already here. Of course, those groups that were already here, a lot of them were old immigrants. So the Italians, like the Irish before them, they will suffer the brunt of basically the abuse from people that are already here. And so, why don't people like Italians? Well, they're poor, they're unskilled. Um, we've talked the fact that they are Catholic, so this is also like the Irish before them. But in particular, they never thought that they would settle here. They saw themselves as being here just temporary. So they kind of used the country as an ATM. They'd make a bunch of money, take that money, send it back to Italy, and then eventually they would go back to Italy. So as a result, about 50% of Italians that immigrated to the United States during this period of new immigration would return back to Italy. And they were coming to do menial jobs. They were unskilled. The problems you had in Italy was that, again, it was dealing with farming. You've just had basically Italy is just now becoming Italy. And so feudalism is finally gone. The papal states are finally gone. So you have this wave of kind of nationalism. So you have that going on. But you also have, the landscape has just been destroyed. You have periods of drought. And then with that drought, You have the fact that there's no trees anymore because all the trees have been cut down for farmland, which leads to erosion. Um, and so conditions were really bad in Italy. So people came here. And of course, they would take any job they could possibly find. They would work, they would buy the cheapest housing, which put them in the poorest neighborhoods. And of course, those poorest neighborhoods are associated with crime. So the Italians became associated with crime. And again, since they never thought that they would settle here permanently, they made no move to assimilate to the United States. They didn't learn English, they didn't go to school. And again, this drew resentment from people that were already here. Now, there are people out there that are trying to help out these immigrants. In particular, a woman by the name of Jane Addams, who creates something called Hull House. Um, and Hull House was started in Chicago, and Hull House was kind of like I think it was like the welcome wagon. So Hull House would be like a community center that would be set up in immigrant neighborhoods. It was a place where immigrants could go to learn skills, um, get an education, be taught English. Their children can be given minimal child care so the parents can go out and work. Um, and again, this wasn't popular. There weren't a lot of people doing this, but this was something that people were kind of doing to try to help out immigrants. And it starts in Chicago and eventually spreads throughout the United States. Um, and the conditions were bad for immigrants. Um, and immigrants lived in tenements. Tenements is just a word meaning like multi-family dwelling. So it's an apartment building. Um, the Lower East Side of Manhattan was where most of these new immigrants would go, as one group would move in, another group would move out. So the Irish started living in tenements, and then when the Irish got settled, became successful, they moved out. Uh, and then the Italians would move in. And so this is kind of the story. Here's how it would go on. And these tenements were crowded. They were packed tightly into a city block, and for a landlord, they cared less about the amenities. So we don't have running water. It takes a while for them to get electricity. They are not safe. Um, and so as you kind of look at this, you have that one image up in the top right. That is a city block in Lower Manhattan. Everything that is orange is a building. So you can see they're just smashing as many buildings as you can possibly get there. So 4 to 5 stories, 4 apartments per floor. And in some families, you had 10, 12, 13 people living in an apartment. It was tight quarters living here. And so these apartments were, especially ones that were built after the 1880s, were called dumbbell tenements because to try to make them a little bit more sanitary, the city of New York said that every apartment had to have a window that had a fresh air source. So apartments and rooms had to either face the street, the back of the apartment, which was usually a courtyard out back, or an air shaft, which would be located in the middle of the building. So they kind of were shaped like dumbbells. You can see that kind of space in between the two buildings, as you see there on the left. And this is just some images of Lower Manhattan at, again, the turn of the century, just how crowded it was. That picture in the upper right is a kitchen. And you can see there's a bed in the kitchen. Again, looking to maximize, space, for people to live in these small, tight quarters. So with all these people coming in here, it bred an anti-immigrant sentiment within the United States. And this was simply called nativism. And nativism goes all the way back to the old immigrants. Again, this anti-Irish sentiment came out of this sense of nativism. And so the thought was that these were mostly Protestant Americans who had been here before and were afraid that they were simply going to be outnumbered, that all these immigrants would come and they would simply outbreed them, so there'd be more of them, they'd outvote them, and overwhelm the native stock, which is basically a racist way of saying is that we don't want, these big-nosed and darker-skinned, Southern Europeans coming in here and basically making us like them. And so the immigrants are blamed for everything. And so as they came in and they overcrowded the cities, cities had to adapt with this, which meant less resources for everyone else, which means parks get crowded, police departments get strained, cities get dirtier, sanitation is strained. And so again, immigrants are blamed for this because you have more people using limited resources. And of course, there's fear of job loss because immigrants will come and they'll work cheap. And so the thought is that they will come and that management will hire them to do jobs that Native Americans had been doing. And of course, these people are coming in with different ideas, different ideologies. They're coming from socialist countries, communist countries. Some are preaching, preaching anarchism. And of course, you have Catholics. So all the deadly isms that you have coming in here. Um, Politically, this is very potent during the time of the old immigrants, in which you have a party called the American Party, or the Know Nothing Party, which basically exists as an anti-immigrant political party. They were called the Know Nothings because they actually preached violence against immigrants, um, saying horrible, terrible things. And then the followers of this party would go out and conduct violence against the Irish. And when their political leaders were asked about this, they would simply say, "Oh no, we know nothing about that." And so that was how they were called the Know Nothings. And part of the problem was that these immigrants would come and they would vote Democratic. And with the rising Republican Party and the Whig Party, they saw this as a threat. Uh, and so anything to discredit these immigrants. And so even the Mexican War that we fought in the 1840s against Mexico, Mexico was a Catholic country. So a war against Mexico was seen as a war against Catholicism. As you got into the new immigrants, um, again, there were no laws before preventing immigration before 1880, right? Because the American government wanted people to come into the country, wanted to fill up the land, wanted to make more states, needed workers. So there's no laws against immigration before 1880. The first law that is passed is purely racist. It's the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. There'll be a similar law about Japanese citizens, and that was simply known as the Gentleman's Agreement with Japan, in which a law was unnecessary, but Japan refused to give exit visas to their citizens to come to the United States. In 1906, the Immigration and Naturalization Service is finally created, and so now this is Ellis Island. So people would come into the country, and you'd have to go through a central kind of like port, and INS would police these ports. And so immigrants, as they arrived to the United States, now would be tested against diseases, things like glaucoma, tuberculosis, like that. And immigrants had to speak English. So the way to get around this was that with the millions of immigrants coming in, the immigration officers simply asked the same questions over and over and over again. So, what is your name? Where are you from? What is your occupation? Who do you know that lives here? That type of thing. And so what immigrants would do is they would quickly memorize those answers. And so this is where you get interesting things happening to people's names, because sometimes the immigration officers would ask the questions out of order. So how does someone get a last name of Baker? Right? Because that's what you do. You're a baker. So when they say, "What's your last name?" you give your answer for occupation. So when you say last name, you go Baker, and that becomes your new last name. This is when last names get ridiculously shortened, because immigration officers don't want to write down all those vowels or those sounds. And again, you're not going to correct the immigration officer. This is how a name like Yanone gets created, where there's no Y in the Italian language, but it's written down with a Y. My great-great-grandfather is not going to argue with that. And so welcome to the United States. To change this in 1917, now you have to be able to read and write. And so the change here is simply that you now have to fill out a form. And again, the way around this is that the shipping companies that were bringing people here would fill out the forms for you. After World War I in 1921, and now we go to a Quota Act, which is kind of similar to what we have today, in which there's a set percentage of how many people can come into the country based on ethnicity. And you use census data. So if there are 100, so if the census of 1920 says there's 100 people here from Italy, that means only 3 people from Italy can come into the country per year. And so with a quota, with a set limit on how many people can come from a place, this will start illegal immigration. And illegal immigration came through Canada. And so to stop that, you create a border control. And as you're kind of seeing, like this is kind of how our system is today, right? Setting limits on people who can come in, policing our borders. Um, and so the problems that we have today, or that we claim to have today, really aren't new. They're just dealing with people coming from different places, but basically coming for the same reasons, looking for a fresh start, new opportunities, escaping persecution.